When imagining how one might explain to an extraterrestrial visitor exactly why human beings managed to become the undisputed dominant species on a planet populated by creatures that are vastly stronger, significantly faster, far more heavily armored, and naturally equipped with formidable built-in weaponry like toxic venom, razor-sharp claws, and crushing jaws, the instinctive response would likely highlight our immense cognitive capacity, our development of complex verbal language to share abstract ideas, our absolute mastery of fire to manipulate the environment, our invention of sophisticated multi-part tools, and our unparalleled ability to cooperate in massive, intricate social structures. What would almost certainly not make the top of that speculative list is the seemingly mundane and straightforward act of throwing rocks. Yet, the specific mechanical execution of the human overhand throw, the unprecedented capability to accelerate a handheld projectile to an incredibly high velocity while simultaneously maintaining absolute directional precision, stands as one of the most profoundly consequential physical adaptations in the entirety of our planet's evolutionary history. This single, seemingly primitive biomechanical action is precisely what directly and irrevocably transformed early, physically vulnerable hominins from mid-sized, opportunistic omnivores scrambling for leftovers into apex predators entirely capable of safely and efficiently dispatching animals that were overwhelmingly more powerful, significantly faster, and substantially better armed than themselves. On the surface, the act of throwing appears almost embarrassingly simplistic, possessing absolutely zero tactical elegance or strategic nuance. You simply grasp a heavy object in your hand and hurl it at a target in the distance. However, this rudimentary action proved to be so overwhelmingly effective that it completely reorganized the ancient and deeply established evolutionary arms race between predators and prey across the globe. To fully grasp the magnitude of this shift, we must first deeply examine what makes the physical act of human throwing so anatomically unusual, because the answer is far more specific and complex than most people realize. While it is undeniably true that every other great ape possesses the fundamental ability to throw objects, and chimpanzees are famously known to do so with considerable frenetic enthusiasm when agitated or threatened, as anyone who has closely observed them in a zoological setting can readily attest, their execution of throwing is dramatically less powerful and infinitely less accurate than that of an average human. This vast disparity is not a result of superior human intelligence, higher cognitive function, or more rigorous practice routines. It is entirely a matter of highly specialized skeletal and muscular anatomy. The human throwing arm is structurally configured in several highly specific, interdependent ways that diverge completely from the anatomy of every other primate on Earth. These distinct anatomical quirks work in perfect orchestrated harmony to store massive amounts of elastic energy within the body's connective tissues during the winding up motion and then release that pent-up energy explosively, a complex mechanical process that absolutely no other ape can duplicate regardless of effort. The crucial physical components enabling this include a uniquely mobile and flexible shoulder joint, a specialized waist structure that can rotate entirely independently of the hips to allow the human torso to snap forward like a coiled whip rather than moving awkwardly as a single rigid block, and highly specific, evolved proportional lengths of the arm segments that specifically enable the elbow to snap open at the exact right millisecond of the throwing arc. Comprehensive biomechanical research, including foundational studies conducted by experts at Harvard, has definitively pinpointed the human rotator cuff and the specific orientation of the shoulder joint as the critical anatomical elements that essentially allow the human body to act as an organic, biological slingshot. During the backward cocking phase of a throw, the human body stretches and stores up immense tension in the ligaments and tendons, and during the explosive forward release phase, this stored tension is unleashed all at once, allowing a highly trained human baseball pitcher to hurl a projectile at astonishing speeds regularly exceeding 100 miles per hour. A remarkably strong chimpanzee possessing significantly more raw upper body muscle mass than a human, regardless of how motivated or intensely trained it might be, biologically tops out at throwing speeds of roughly 20 miles per hour. This massive, insurmountable difference is quite literally hardwired into our bones and connective tissues. The evolutionary timeline of this profound anatomical shift points directly to its original survival purpose. The specific skeletal shoulder structure, absolutely required for high-powered, high-velocity throwing, first appears unambiguously in the fossil record approximately 2 million years ago in the species Homo erectus. This biological development predates the invention of complex, culturally crafted weaponry like bows or atlatls by a massive temporal margin, but it aligns perfectly with the earliest definitive archaeological evidence of our ancient ancestors actively hunting large, dangerous game rather than merely scavenging carcasses. This chronological timeline strongly and logically supports the theory that the physical anatomy required for throwing and the behavioral survival strategy of hunting prey with projectiles co-evolved simultaneously and symbiotically. Those early human ancestors who possessed a slight anatomical variation allowing them to throw slightly harder and with a bit more accuracy secured significantly more high-quality protein, survived brutal winters and droughts longer, and successfully passed those exact specific anatomical traits down to their offspring. Generation after generation, the merciless engine of natural selection refined this specific physical ability until it eventually produced a species biologically optimized and custom-built for one of the most bizarre, asymmetric, and unprecedented hunting strategies the natural world had ever seen. The true, terrifying scale of this evolutionary advantage only becomes completely clear when you mentally shift perspectives and consider the situation from the viewpoint of the massive prey animals on the receiving end of these lethal projectiles. In the natural world, nearly every single predator secures a kill by physically closing the distance and engaging in desperate, close-quarters combat utilizing naturally evolved weapons like sharp teeth, tearing claws, or potent venom. This incredibly intimate and dangerous style of hunting absolutely requires the predator to willingly enter a lethal danger zone where the desperate prey animal has a completely legitimate high percentage opportunity to inflict severe, debilitating, or instantly fatal injuries in panicked self-defense. This dangerous, high-stakes dynamic has driven a continuous, grinding evolutionary arms race over millions upon millions of years. Prey animals slowly evolve to run faster, grow vastly thicker defensive hides, and develop devastating defensive weaponry like massive, piercing horns, sharp hooves, and heavy antlers. In direct response to these defenses, predators evolved over millennia to be stealthier, faster, and physically stronger. Because both sides of this biological equation are constantly adapting and counter-adapting to each other's physical capabilities, the overall contest remains relatively balanced, which is exactly why the hunting failure rates for apex predators like African lions and timber wolves are surprisingly high, and why the vast majority of large prey animals actually successfully survive their violent encounters with predators. Human throwing technology completely and utterly shattered this ancient, unwritten biological contract. A massive prey animal's entire defensive repertoire, its incredible ability to kick with bone-shattering force, gore with razor-sharp horns, bite, or sprint away, has been finely and meticulously calibrated by millions of years of brutal evolution to specifically counter the close-range ambush attacks of the big cats and pack hunters in its immediate environment. It possesses absolutely zero biological calibration, instinctual programming, or evolutionary memory for a heavy, blunt rock or a sharpened wooden spear suddenly flying through the air at high velocity from 20 or 30 meters away. The prey's meticulously evolved physical defenses are rendered instantly and tragically irrelevant. The fastest, most agile antelope on the open plains simply cannot outpace a swiftly thrown spear, and the most formidable, aggressive Cape buffalo cannot gore a human hunter who is safely standing far beyond the maximum reach of its deadly horns. This stark asymmetry transformed the natural, balanced evolutionary arms race into an entirely one-sided slaughter, completely bypassing the prey's formidable defenses entirely. This is precisely why the archaeological and paleontological fossil records consistently display such a stark, predictable, and grim pattern whenever anatomically modern humans or their direct projectile-wielding ancestors migrated into a completely new geographical region for the first time. The massive indigenous megafauna that had never before encountered a ranged, throwing predator almost immediately went completely extinct. The massive woolly mammoths, the towering giant ground sloths, the heavily armored mastodons, and countless other dominant megafauna species did not vanish from the earth because they were physically overpowered in wrestling matches with human hunters. They were driven into rapid extinction because human projectile technology allowed them to be systematically killed from a completely safe distance where their immense physical size, thick hides, and massive strength meant absolutely nothing. Furthermore, because these ancient animals had absolutely no evolutionary context or prior ancestral exposure to this bizarre type of ranged threat, they were left completely without the necessary behavioral instincts required to mount an appropriate life-saving avoidance response. Compounding this massive physical advantage was the profound game-changing impact of rapid social transmission. which ultimately made human throwing infinitely more dangerous than any purely biological trait could ever be. Unlike the physical adaptations of a saber-toothed tiger or a massive cave bear, which must be agonizingly and slowly encoded into the genetics of a population over thousands of successive generations, throwing is a culturally transmitted and taught skill. It can be endlessly refined, meticulously optimized, and rapidly spread through direct, intentional teaching and visual imitation. A superior, more accurate throwing technique or a slightly more aerodynamically balanced spear design does not require a random genetic mutation to spread. It can be explicitly taught to every single member of a nomadic hunting party in a single afternoon. The intricate design of chipped stone projectile points, the precise calibrated weight distribution of a throwing stick, and the brilliant mechanical invention of leverage mechanisms like the atlatl, which artificially extends the length of the human throwing arm to generate even more terrifying and lethal velocity, are all products of rapid cultural innovation, not slow biological evolution. This profound difference meant that while the prey animals were biologically restricted to adapting at the glacial, multi-generational pace of natural evolution, human hunters were exponentially improving their lethality at the lightning-fast speed of cultural innovation. This massive speed advantage of potentially thousands of years to one ensured that even the most terrifying, robust, and heavily armored prey animals in human history ultimately stood absolutely no chance of survival. Beyond the brutal realm of hunting for food, the ability to throw accurately and forcefully had equally profound civilization-shaping implications for interpersonal human conflict and the violent trajectory of human warfare. A group of early humans capable of accurately raining heavy, skull-crushing stones or sharp, piercing spears down upon an enemy tribe from a safe distance held an absolutely insurmountable tactical advantage over a rival group relying solely on close quarters, hand-to-hand combat. The unprecedented capacity to inflict devastating lethal casualties upon an opposing force before they even had the physical opportunity to strike back permanently altered the strategic calculus of territorial disputes, resource competition, and mate acquisition. Deep anthropological studies of historical, small-scale hunter-gatherer societies consistently and repeatedly highlight range projectile weapons as the central, deciding factor in tribal warfare. The immense cultural resources, time, and energy that traditional ancient societies invested in relentlessly developing throwing skills through endless daily practice, intense competitive games, and elaborate social rituals specifically dedicated to demonstrating throwing accuracy reflect precisely how absolutely critical this capability was for basic survival in a harsh world where violent conflict between rival groups was a constant, looming reality. Adding yet another fascinating layer of complexity to this evolutionary story is the astonishing, underappreciated cognitive demand required to actually throw something accurately. Consistently hitting a moving, erratic target with a moving projectile requires the human nervous system to unconsciously solve an incredibly complex, multivariable physics equation in real time. The human brain must instantly and continuously calculate the parabolic trajectory of the object under the constant influence of gravity, perfectly and seamlessly time the complex sequence of muscle contractions firing from the legs, transferring through the rotating torso, and snapping down to the fingertips, compensate for atmospheric wind resistance, and accurately predict exactly where the moving target will be at the precise future millisecond the projectile arrives. This massive, high-speed computational effort happens completely beneath the level of conscious, deliberate thought, yet it utilizes and requires the exact same type of advanced predictive, model-based reasoning that heavily characterizes higher-level, abstract human cognition. Many evolutionary researchers have convincingly theorized that the intense life-or-death evolutionary pressure to throw accurately in order to secure food and survive conflicts may have directly contributed to the rapid, unprecedented expansion of the human prefrontal cortex. If surviving meant eating, and eating meant successfully hitting a target with a rock, then nature heavily and relentlessly favored individuals with superior predictive physical modeling systems hardwired into their brains, potentially kickstarting the broader cognitive leap that firmly separates modern humans from all other primates. When you zoom out and look at the entire bloody history of human military conflict, it is essentially nothing more than a continuous, escalating technological elaboration on this single, fundamental act of throwing. A traditional bow and arrow simply uses a flexible piece of crafted wood and a tense string to store elastic energy rather than relying solely on the human shoulder joint. A medieval crossbow takes this mechanical concept even further by utilizing winches and mechanical levers. A massive medieval catapult merely scales up the throwing arm concept to launch heavy, destructive boulders too massive for any human to lift. Cannons, infantry rifles, and modern artillery shells utilize the violent chemical combustion of gunpowder to exponentially accelerate a projectile, while modern intercontinental ballistic missiles use complex chemical rocket propulsion. Yet, despite the massive, paradigm-shifting technological leaps across millennia, moving from raw muscle power to electromagnetic railguns, the core strategic military philosophy has never changed one iota. The goal is always to deliver overwhelming, lethal force from a safe, untouchable distance with absolute precision, striking the target before it can possibly react or respond. Throwing also worked in a deadly, unprecedented synergy with our other highly unique evolutionary trait, persistence hunting. Our early ancestors possessed the unique anatomical structure and advanced thermoregulatory sweating system to jog endlessly in the blistering heat, relentlessly tracking prey over vast distances until the terrified animal simply collapsed from total heat exhaustion. Once the hunted prey was completely immobilized and desperately vulnerable, the ability to throw allowed the human hunters to safely and cleanly execute the final kill without ever having to engage in a highly dangerous, unpredictable final physical struggle with a cornered, panicked, and thrashing beast. This dual-pronged, relentless strategy of sheer physical exhaustion, immediately followed by ranged execution, had absolutely no precedent in the natural world. The archaeological record heavily supports this timeline, clearly showing that around 300,000 years ago, the sudden emergence of hafted stone spear points coincided directly with a massive, permanent shift in ancient human diets. Instead of merely scavenging the rotting leftovers of other apex predators, humans began actively, confidently pursuing and killing the largest, healthiest game available in their environment, radically increasing their vital caloric intake. Ultimately, what makes this entire evolutionary story so deeply fascinating is the sheer, unadulterated simplicity of the core insight. The defining foundational innovation that allowed a single species to completely conquer the planet was not a highly complex philosophical breakthrough or a nuanced piece of social engineering. It was the brutally simple, pragmatic realization that you can easily kill an enemy or a food source without ever having to physically touch them. This spectacularly unglamorous concept, perfectly combined with the unique skeletal anatomy required to execute it physically, the immense neurological processing power to make it consistently accurate, and the robust social structures to rapidly share and improve it, turned a fragile, slow-moving primate into an unstoppable planetary force. The profound evolutionary feedback loop where throwing provided the crucial meat that fueled brain growth, and the physically larger brain provided the necessary processing power for even better, more accurate throwing, relentlessly drove human evolution forward for hundreds of thousands of years. From the absolute earliest hurled rocks on the African savanna to the most advanced computer-guided modern weaponry in existence today, the overarching continuous theme of human dominance has always been firmly rooted in that very first simple, deadly throw.